say that we've lost the zero-till component
in the regulated
market. What other practices that I as a farmer can I use to enhance and then to receive the carbon credits? And then I guess second part of the question would be, as a Saskatchewan farmer, how far back can I go back in my records to accumulate or get paid for these?
Great question. Firstly, we're launching the voluntary zero-till protocol, which will be basically a cut and paste version of the regulated protocol, and we'll be able to use that in Alberta too, in the non-regulated market, but we'll apply that all across the prairies. And the second thing is the nitrous oxide emission reduction protocol, which goes to how farmers handle nitrogen on the farm. And it's to reduce the emissions of nitrous oxide from the soil structure and reduce the amount of leaching from the breakdown of nitrogen in the soil, right?
Yeah.
So it's in essence a nitrogen use efficiency calculation, right? Our average NUE in Alberta rate today is about 65%. In other words, farmers buying 100 pounds actual M, putting it down, there's only 65 or 66 pounds getting into the plant. The other third of that application either leaches or gases off. Doesn't do anything in terms of crop production. So the NERP protocol is based on, grade 10 agronomy of the 4 R's of good nitrogen management. And there are levels involved that go to precision ag, the use of double inhibited or controlled release nitrogen products, whether it's Aggregation in the 28 or ESN or Cargill's double inhibited nitrogen product, those types of things. And so the moral of the story is, if we can increase that nitrogen use efficiency on your farm, 2 things are going to happen. You'll be able to create offsets. And in theory, if we increase the amount of M getting into the plants, we could grow more with less applied M. That's the kicker. That's the key. And the third protocol that we have been using in Alberta since 2016, and we're going to take into the voluntary markets across the country, is the beef feeding efficiency, which goes to beef feeding efficiency protocol in a feedlot situation. There's no application to a cow-calf producer, but in a controlled environment where we can monitor rations daily. And so it's a calculation based on the amount of dry matter going in and beef on the hook in the Cargill plant, for example.
Yeah.
So minimize the amount of feed increases and increase the amount of beef. That's what that calculation is about. And of course, if you grow more, if you have more kilos of beef per kilo of dry matter intake, then that's a small methane reduction per kilo of beef produced, right? And we can quantify that. Yeah. So, and then the second part of your question is, what's the retroactive component?
Yeah.
We filed these projects to go back to 2020 and not before that. And I know one of our competitors is out there, at least they were saying they could go back to 2018 and 19, I think. And we don't want to go there for a couple of reasons. One is I couldn't find a verifier that knows what they're doing that would be willing to verify 4-year-old agricultural data. And secondly, I couldn't find a buyer that has any interest in 4-year-old offsets off the farm.
Makes sense.
Off the farm.
Nobody wants to entice an audit.
No, and no buyer wants to take that risk that audit might go sideways, right?
Yeah.
So we're gonna start with 20, capture that, capture 21, and go forward. That's what our plan is, and I think we're going to be fine, because data integrity is everything, And I'm comfortable that we can get good data from the 2020 crop going forward. And I'm not so comfortable prior to that.
So our government has imposed a target of 30% fertilizer reduction by 2030.
Emissions reductions or application reductions?
Well, emissions, I believe.
Emissions, okay.
And most farmers interpret that as we're gonna be cut back on how much we can apply, and instead of using a soil test to decide what to apply, we're gonna have a government bureaucrat. So what's your thoughts on that? Is there ways that we can circumvent this, or how do we deal with this problem?
Well, I think you're right in the crosshairs where this nitrogen protocol is going. Jim. I shudder at the thought of some bureaucrat telling us how to give our crops groceries. I shudder. Anyway, the whole point of this protocol is to not reduce the application of the nitrogen, but to reduce the emissions generated by that application. In other words, if we get more nitrogen into the plant, there'll be less emissions coming out of the soil. So nowhere, I don't believe that Ottawa is encouraging us to apply less fertilizer. They're encouraging us, or demanding, or whatever term you want to call, that we reduce emissions out of our soil. And that's exactly what this protocol attempts to do, is to lower those emissions by getting more actual nitrogen into the crop. So I think that the question you asked me is, are they going to be telling us how much nitrogen to apply? No, that's not the intent. They want us, of course, as an industry, to reduce our nitrous oxide emissions, and we can do that out of manure and out of cropping situations, and the addition of synthetic nitrogen or manufactured nitrogen. I think we can do that.
So you talked about nitrogen efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Given the cost of nitrogen this year in particular, and into the future, it sounds like, you had mentioned a 35% literally goes off into the atmosphere, and it is not, and that is our big part of our emissions in agriculture. So explain to me how we can capture that in relationship to the reduction in emissions that is being asked of us.
Sure.
How can we move that into any farmer, if they buy a pound of fertilizer, wants the whole thing to go in the plant, and instead of 65% of it. So
yeah,
where's your thoughts on that?
Well, the agronomy embedded within the NERP protocol, nitrous oxide emission reduction protocol, or NERP as we love to call it, all the agronomy in there, based on the 4 R's of good nitrogen management, should and will increase the amount of N that stays in the ammonium form for as long as possible, so the plant can ingest it, versus leaching or gassing off as part of the denitrification cycle, right? Mm-hmm. So the protocol itself, Jim, does not demand or encourage farmers to apply less nitrogen. What it does is encourage growers to use the nitrogen more wisely. In other words, to get that nitrogen use efficiency up 10% or whatever. And in theory, if that nitrogen use efficiency went up 10%, theoretically, the next year you might be able to apply a little bit less N if you increase your nitrogen use efficiency. So again, there's no negative connotation about nitrogen application. It's just, let's use it better. That's what it's all about. And if we use it better, and get more of that nitrogen into the plant instead of indirect emissions or leaching, guess what? Our emissions will reduce
Yeah.
significantly.
Yeah, one will follow the other.
Exactly, yeah.